Thank you very much, Hans, and good morning. Nearly still, we are running. It is still the morning to everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. The European Commission values a lot of what all of you are doing for halting the loss of biodiversity in Europe and implementing all the nice policies that we are thinking about and developing at the European level on the ground. And I'm going to try in a short time, because a lot is happening at the moment. A lot of things might change in the future in the right or in the wrong direction. I'm going to try to tell you what's happening in Brussels and why this is relevant to the work that you are doing. You all know this. We haven't achieved the 2010 target that we have set ourselves. This is the International Year of Biodiversity, and I must say that really I'm very satisfied about how politically this has been used as an opportunity to increase fundamentally the understanding of our political leaders on the problems of biodiversity, the roles it can play for climate change mitigation and adaptation, and as a basis for our economic development. Our commissioner, he must be tired of hearing the word biodiversity because he has had a lot of meetings. There have even been other commissioners who have completely other different portfolios that have been visiting Natura 2000 sites in the EU. In the UN General Assembly, President Barroso of the Commission, he has mentioned biodiversity and had a specific speech on that. The President of the Council, Van Rompuy, is going to visit the Belgium National Park in a week's time together with us. So there is really a lot happening, and I think this is very good. Also, within the EU policy making, the Commission presented a communication on what should we do now that we know we have failed to achieve the 2010 target. We have presented several options. Luckily, the ministers of the EU agreed on the most ambitious of them, and this was endorsed by the heads of states of the EU, which is referred to in this paper in the declaration, so I don't need to tell you what this target is. And we are now working towards a new strategy that will try to make sure that this time we will achieve our target in 2020. And I will tell you a little bit more about this. So this little fellow, this looks a bit afraid because I think as many of us is a bit questioning, are we this time really going to deliver? And there are, of course, a lot of open questions about that, climate change being only one of them. So in this communication, we are preparing on setting out what we need to do in order to this time achieve the 2020 target. We are focusing on 6 sub-targets which try to look at the 6 major policies we need to address if we want to make a change, and this is for the EU policy framework. The first one being the one you know the best, it is nature conservation, and I will come back to this again. Then you have a bird that represents agriculture. Agriculture policy is hugely influential to what's happening to biodiversity in the EU. The common agriculture policy is about to be reformed, and it's really important that we make this reform in a way that we go away from the current practices we have and try to have more recognition of the values that ecosystems deliver and how agriculture can support those values. Then we have an invasive species. This is a major policy gap we have in the EU compared to Australia, for example, where they have very strict and good regulations. We have some member states that have something, but at the EU level, we don't have any system, any legislation to deal with invasive species, and you know that they don't stop at borders. You really need a continental approach or a European-wide approach to that. Then you have this world, which means that we also have to tackle our global responsibility. We have to reduce fundamentally our ecological footprint, and we will address this in this communication. You have this nice bird eating fish, which represents our fisheries policies. I think the state of biodiversity in our seas is still quite okay, but the way and the rate at which it's being degraded is really appalling, and I don't think that most of our citizens know about this. They don't know that they won't be able to buy or to afford buying fish in a few decades because it's going to be gone. So this is really something fundamental, and we know that our own fisheries policies has been also fueling these sort of wrong practices, and there is recognition in the other department that we have fundamentally to change that. And the last picture represents land use planning, green infrastructure. I will come to that a little bit later, so I will not dwell on this right now. Of course, we are being helped by this study that Hans Friedrich has already mentioned, the TEEP study, which really has had a major impact also in areas like financing sectors, banking, etc. And I would just want to highlight this report. They have issued a number of reports in the coming years, and the final report will be published in Nagoya at the CBD COP. And this one, the red one, is called TEEP for Local and Regional Policymakers, and I would really encourage you to read it, because there are a number of tools that can be used practically to value the biodiversity that is in your area and to incorporate this in local policy making. Because this is a major recognition that we have seen, that a lot of what is happening that's going wrongly is, yes, fueled by wider global or European policies, but a lot of the solutions that we can bring, they are really have to be taken at the local level. So creating this link, local, global, regional, is very important, and this report hopefully will help. It also has a lot of case studies from the world, and in fact, they scrabbled a bit by finding good case studies in Europe. So I think we also have a role to play to explain a lot of what you are doing in bringing this into those global studies. You all know this. This is the EU's Natura 2000 network, has been created following the implementation of the so-called Birds and Habitats Directive. It has now nearly 26,000 sites and covers nearly 18% of the EU territory. Now, for those of you who don't know yet, Natura 2000 is not exactly the same as a national park. It is not an area where you have full protection of the area, for example. It has the objective to make sure that the species and habitats and the birds that are most valuable in Europe achieve a favorable conservation status, and that can be very different things. That can be a very small spot, that can be huge areas, that can be areas with intensive farming, but there is also a lot of them, and I think you calculated that around 60% of the Natura 2000 areas are those parks that you are managing and you are dealing with. So it is not excluding the national park concept, it's just that its prime objective is not this one. And we have assessed last year where we are on those species and habitats that are protected under the Habitats Directive. And this is what we have on the left side. Only 17% are in a favorable conservation status. Now, NGOs and others have told us we have to agree on the objective that by 2020 we have 100% of those species and habitats under favorable conservation status. The problem is this is impossible. Look at the habitat glaciers. I think with climate change we can do whatever we want. We will not have it in a favorable conservation status. And of course, a lot of the measures that we do for restoration, they will not have an immediate effect. It takes time. And we asked the European Environment Agency to calculate what would be a realistic but ambitious, meaning that if we really fully implement the legislation, we do everything we can, what kind of percentage we might be able to achieve, or we should be able to achieve in 2020. And they said that would be a third, more or less, of the species and a quarter of the habitats to be in a favorable conservation status. What is also important is that the unknown, because we still have the gray area, this is unknown, has to be dramatically reduced. I don't think it's acceptable that we still have for 30% of the species that we have agreed to protect in 1992. We don't know what is their conservation status in the EU. The others, I just played a bit with it to see this is how it could look like, but please, there is no scientific justification for the other percentages of the other category, red being unfavorable, bad, and orange being unfavorable, but not so bad. And this is what we need to do. This is where we are, and this is what we need to do as far as nature conservation and protected areas concerned. Without a pointer is a bit difficult, but I also have this graph as you, which is from the outset not so easy to understand. The red line is where we want to go with the conservation status of the species. It is quite low at the moment, although we have done quite a lot of work on designation. We have most of the terrestrial sites have been designated, but we have a huge gap in the marine area. So that means that we have to really have much more designation in the marine area. Then we have management. Designating is one thing. You need to now to develop your conservation objectives and the measures, develop the management plans, and make sure that these are also being implemented. Here we don't know very well at the moment how many of those protected areas are effectively and well managed, but we think that not enough. And this is really the major focus that we have to do in the implementation of the Birds and Habitats Directive and Natura 2000 in the next years, is to really ensure that all of these areas are adequately managed. But still, if we have a full management, we have the whole area that is outside all those areas. We won't achieve a favorable conservation status, even if we manage completely as we should do all of these Natura 2000 sites, because all this pressure that is happening outside those areas. So we have to achieve a full integration of the network into the wider landscape and have a real policy coherence with all the other different policies that impact on those areas in order to make sure that we achieve our target, and that's integration at the lower level. And I will talk a little bit about some others. Just, you know this all, that climate change and biodiversity are the two sides of the same coin. We cannot halt biodiversity loss if we don't stop climate change, and we cannot mitigate and adapt climate change if we continue losing biodiversity, so I will not dwell on this anymore. But the problem is, we all know this, but those even in the environment community that are dealing with climate change, they only start to understand this. I think the discussion on RED has been very helpful in this respect, but if you look at the measures that the national climate change action plans have, it's pumping CO2 in the soil, is increasing the renewable energy in cars and in isolation of houses. All of this is good, but this major impact that we could have if we would stop halting biodiversity and use the ecosystems in their climate change mitigation adaptation possibility is still very much unrecognized in those areas, and that's something we need to do. We think that one of the tools that could help us is the term green infrastructure. Because we have seen, and we discussed with the colleagues in the regional development, in the financing, in all the other departments that think that our work on species and nature, this is something that is actually only costing. It doesn't provide any benefits. Despite the TEEP study, this is the case. But when we tell them that what we want you to do is to invest in our green infrastructure, which is underpinning economic development, which is the cheapest way to stop flooding, for example, because if you restore and preserve floodplain forests, this is much cheaper than building dams, etc. There you really start to have a resonance, and that's why we think that this concept of green infrastructure, which is meant to increase the connectivity, which is meant to increase the physical but also the functional connectivity of our nature, and particularly the concept that tries to demonstrate that the ecosystem services that we have is something that we have for free. We just need to invest more in it so we can capture their benefits.